I want to be clear about something. My duty is not to fuel speculation, it's to deliver justice, and that requires patience and discipline on everybody's part. This investigation was driven by a single purpose, to secure justice for Celeste Rivas and for those who loved her. We had to be certain that nothing we did or said would ever jeopardize this case. Ms. Rivas was a reported runaway from Riverside County. During the course of our investigation, detectives learned that she had been involved in a sexual relationship with Mr. Burke when she was a minor and he was an adult. On April 23, 2025, Ms. Rivas arrived at Mr. Burke's home in the Hollywood Hills. That's the last time she was known to be alive.
7 months. That is how long this took. And when the Los Angeles Police Department finally moved, Hay did not play about it. Armed officers, tactical gear, a loudspeaker outside a Hollywood Hills home demanding surrender, neighbors standing outside watching in disbelief. One witness said there were so many cops on that street, it looked like a scene straight out of a movie. Except this was not a movie, this was real. And the man they came for that day was David Anthony Burke, known to the world as D4vd. Video montages in his bedroom to having tens of millions of streams on Spotify. He was on his way up, fast. And by all appearances, the world was his. And then there was Celeste. Her name was Celeste Abigail Rivas Hernandez, 14 years old, a 7th grader from Lake Elsinore, California, a quiet town about 70 miles southeast of Los Angeles. Her parents had immigrated from El Salvador, building a life here for their family. By every account, she was somebody's everything. A daughter, a sister, a child. Now here is where this story gets complicated, and I need you to stay with me, because understanding how these two people ended up connected is important to understanding everything that came after. Investigators say the connection between D4vd and Celeste began online. She was allegedly a member of his official Discord server as early as 2022, and according to people in that server at the time, she was not just a fan. Other users reportedly referred to her as his girlfriend. She was 13 years old. In January 2024, the two appeared together on a Twitch live stream.
It's controversial of kids.
Really good.
Okay,
it's been a good one. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Mwah, 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 mwah. Oh my! Delete everything. Delete everything. Everything goes.
Delete everything. Now, what exactly did he mean by that? We cannot say for certain. But what prosecutors allege is that by that point, a deeply inappropriate relationship between a grown adult and a 13-year-old child had already been going on for months. A relationship that, according to the charging documents, began around her 13th birthday in September of 2023 and reportedly continued for an entire year. Let that land for a second. She was a child, a 7th grader, and he was a grown man with a rising music career, a Hollywood Hills home, and reportedly a $20,000 a month rental property. Now here's what makes this case even more alarming. Celeste had been reported missing by her family, not once, not twice, 3 times in the final year of her life. The system logged her as a runaway each time, but the people who loved her never stopped looking. She last made contact with her family in May of 2024. After that, silence. Her family knew she had some kind of connection to the singer. Her mother had even confirmed that her daughter mentioned a boyfriend named David. They reportedly had matching tattoos, the same design on their index fingers. September 7th, 2025 was Celeste's 15th birthday. The day that should have been a celebration for her family became the day before the most devastating discovery of this entire case. On September 8th, 2025, a worker at a tow yard in Hollywood noticed something deeply troubling. A smell coming from an impounded Tesla on the lot. A 2023 Tesla Model Y, registered to David Burke at a Texas address. The car had been sitting abandoned in the Hollywood Hills since late July. Neighbors had been complaining about it for weeks. It was eventually cited and towed. And when that worker followed that smell and called law enforcement, the LAPD responded. When investigators opened that front trunk, what they found would set off one of the most closely watched investigations in recent memory. Inside that trunk were the badly decomposed remains of a young girl, placed inside bags. She was wearing a tube top, black leggings, yellow metal stud earrings, a chain bracelet, and on her right index finger, a tattoo that read, "Shh." She was identified through forensic examination on September 16, 2025, found one day after what would have been her 15th birthday. That same night her remains were discovered, D4vd was on stage in Minneapolis, performing, as part of his Withered World Tour, and that is where the questions began. How long had she been in that car? How did she get there? And where was David Burke when it happened? Now, if you watched our previous video on this case, you know that those questions haunted this investigation for 7 long months. Law enforcement stayed almost completely silent, no suspects named publicly, no cause of death released. The coroner's report was placed under court seal at the request of the LAPD. Even the medical examiner's office pushed back on that, publicly stating that security holds like that are virtually unheard of and have not been proven to improve outcomes. But the LAPD held firm. The car was registered to him. She was found in his car. He had a known connection to her. So why was it taking this long? Here is what most people watching from the outside did not fully understand. And this is important because it speaks to something bigger than just this case. The state of Celeste's remains meant that standard forensic evidence had significantly degraded. Investigators could not simply look at the evidence and build a clean case overnight. They had digital records to subpoena, Tesla vehicle data to analyze, witnesses to track down, some cooperative, some not. A grand jury was convened to hear evidence and lock in testimony, and every single step had to be airtight. Because this was not just a murder case, what was building underneath the surface was far more layered than the public knew. In February 2026, court documents revealed that D4vd had been officially named as the target of a secret grand jury investigation. His parents, Colleen and Dawood Burke, and his brother were all subpoenaed to testify. A record executive had reportedly also appeared before the grand jury, and a close associate of Burke's named Neil Langston had reportedly been arrested in Montana for allegedly failing to appear as a witness. Something was building, quietly, methodically, and on April 16, 2026, it came to a head. Armed officers descended on that Hollywood Hills home just after 4:30 in the afternoon. A loudspeaker, tactical gear, weapons drawn, neighbors watching from their doorways. David Anthony Burke was taken into custody and booked on suspicion of murder, held without bail. And 4 days later, on April 20th, 2026, Los Angeles County District Attorney Nathan Hochman stood before the cameras flanked by a mugshot of David Burke and a photograph of Celeste Rivas Hernandez. And he said what this community had been waiting 7 months to hear.
Today I am announcing the charges against David Anthony Burke, the musician known as David, spelled D4vd, in connection with the brutal and horrific murder of Celeste, a 14-year-old at that time. These charges include the most serious charges that a DA's office can bring. That is first-degree murder with special circumstances. The special circumstances being lying in wait, committing this crime for financial gain, or murdering a witness in an investigation. These special circumstances carry with it, along with the first-degree murder charge, a maximum sentence of life without the possibility of parole or the death penalty. The determination on whether or not the district attorney's office will seek the death penalty will be made at a later time. And there are additional charges against Mr. Burke, including continuous sexual acts, lewd and lascivious sexual acts with an individual under 14 years old, and mutilating a human remains of a body.
The most serious charges a DA's office can bring, first-degree murder, with special circumstances. And that is where this story gets even deeper, because what those special circumstances reveal about what prosecutors believe actually happened to Celeste is what nobody outside that investigation fully knew until that moment. Now here is where everything shifts. Because up until this press conference, the public knew the broad strokes. A body was found. It was in his car. He had a connection to her. But what prosecutors laid out on April 20th, 2026 filled in details that changed the entire shape of this story. And once you hear the specific timeline, you will understand exactly why this case is being called premeditated and calculated. April 23, 2025. That is the date prosecutors say Celeste walked into D4vd's Hollywood Hills home. According to the charging documents, she went there at his invitation, and from that moment forward, she was never heard from again. Now hold that date in your mind, April 23, 2025, because here is what else happened on that exact same day. April 23, 2025 tickets go on sale for D4vd's Withered World Tour. Tickets went on sale for his world tour. The same day prosecutors say Celeste lost her life was the same day his career was set to launch into its biggest chapter. His debut album, Withered, was dropping in 2 days. He was doing international press. He was everywhere. Tens of millions of streams, brand deals, festival bookings. The world was paying attention, and prosecutors say that is exactly the motive.
As the evidence will show in court, the financial gain was for Mr. Burke to maintain his very lucrative musical career that Celeste was threatening on that particular night. The third charge, in addition to lying in wait and for financial gain, is murdering a witness to an investigation. In this particular case, as the evidence will come out in court, the witness...
Now, the DA also described 3 specific legal reasons why this case carries special circumstances. And I want to break these down clearly because they matter. The first is lying in wait. Prosecutors allege that Celeste came to that home at his invitation. She walked in trusting the situation, and allegedly, that invitation was the trap. The second is murder for financial gain. His career, his streams, his endorsements, his tour, all of it allegedly at stake if she talked. The third, and this one is significant, is murdering a witness to an investigation, because Celeste herself was the key witness to the alleged conduct that is the subject of the second charge in this case. Prosecutors are saying he did not just allegedly kill her to protect his image. He allegedly killed her to silence the one person whose testimony could have put him away. Now I want to be clear, David Burke has pleaded not guilty to all of these charges. His attorneys have been firm and consistent in their response.
We believe the actual evidence will show David Burke did not murder Celeste Rivas Hernandez, nor was he the cause of her death. And we would like to be able to have the evidence come into the light of day at the earliest opportunity in order to establish that. We're asking for April 23rd as a 3 of 10.
So we have 2 very different narratives heading into what will likely be a lengthy and closely watched legal process. And it is going to come down to evidence, physical evidence, forensic evidence, digital evidence, and witness testimony. Now let us talk about what we know regarding that evidence, because some of what came out of those charging documents is deeply revealing. The charging documents confirmed for the first time that Celeste was killed with a sharp instrument. That had been sealed under court order for months. The medical examiner had made a determination, but the public was not allowed to know. Now we know. Prosecutors also laid out a more specific timeline than anything previously released. They say Celeste was killed on or around April 23, 2025. But the alleged mutilation of her remains did not happen until approximately 2 weeks later. On or around May 5, 2025, prosecutors allege Celeste's remains were mutilated. May 5th. Her arms and legs were allegedly severed from her body, and her remains were placed into 2 separate bags inside the front trunk of that Tesla, a car that then sat in the Hollywood Hills. Through the spring, through the summer, until a tow yard worker followed a smell in September and called the police. That means, according to prosecutors, Celeste's remains were in that vehicle for approximately 4 months. She deserved so much better than that, and her family deserved to know what happened to their daughter long before they did. Now here is something that a lot of people were not aware of until investigators confirmed it. The LAPD revealed they had been looking closely at a trip D4vd allegedly took to a remote area of Santa Barbara County in the spring of 2025. The timing of that trip reportedly aligns with the May 5th date. When asked about it directly at the press conference, the DA declined to give specifics, but confirmed.
They recovered and analyzed a substantial amount of digital and forensic evidence. They stayed focused, disciplined, and committed to uncovering the truth. Their work, in close collaboration with the District Attorney's Office, has brought us to this moment today.
Now the autopsy report. This is the piece of this case that the public has been waiting on since September of 2025. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner completed and signed that report all the way back in December of 2025. December. And yet nobody outside that investigation was allowed to see it. It sat under a court-ordered seal for months, while Celeste's own family waited to understand what happened to their daughter. On April 22, 2026, it was finally released, and the findings are devastating. The official cause of death listed in that report is multiple penetrating injuries. The manner of death ruled a homicide. According to the report, Celeste sustained 2 separate wounds to her torso, one to her right abdomen that perforated her liver at approximately 1.5 inches deep, a second wound to her left lower chest at a depth of at least 2 inches. The report describes both wounds as having smooth edges, consistent with sharp force injuries.
The condition of her body, how she was presented, it causes a lot of problems. Because of the condition of her body, it's a lot of tissue, it's decomposed, so you really can't collect what you want in an ordinary autopsy.
10 days after Celeste's remains were discovered, LAPD executed a search warrant at the home Burke had been occupying. They seized electronic devices, including a computer. But a private investigator hired by the property owner found something else on that premises. Something that raised serious questions about whether evidence had been destroyed. A burn cage incinerator. Shortly after that search, Burke's manager terminated the lease on the property and he moved out. Now, I am not going to tell you what to think about that. The facts speak for themselves. Meanwhile, the grand jury had been quietly working for months. Multiple people from Burke's inner circle were called to testify. A record executive reportedly appeared before that jury. And a man named Neil Langston, reportedly a close associate of Burke's, was arrested in Montana for allegedly failing to appear as a witness. He reportedly only testified for 30 to 40 minutes, according to sources. Whether he was cooperative or not remains unclear. Prosecutors confirmed the investigation is ongoing, and when asked directly whether anyone else in Burke's circle could face charges, he did not say no. Now, here is something that caught a lot of people's attention, and honestly, it is hard to ignore. D4vd's music, specifically his music videos. His breakthrough hit was called Romantic Homicide. The video features imagery of a woman and a blindfolded figure. His song One More Dance has a music video that depicts someone placing a body into the trunk of a car. And around the time of his album release in April 2025, the same month Celeste allegedly lost her life, he was publicly discussing an alter ego character he created called IT4MI, named after the Japanese word for pain. Now music is creative expression. Artists explore dark themes. That alone does not make someone guilty of anything. But in the context of everything prosecutors are alleging, those creative choices take on a different weight. And whether or not any of it becomes relevant in a courtroom remains to be seen. What we do know is that investigators recovered more than 40 terabytes of digital evidence in this case. 40 terabytes. That is an enormous amount of data. Text messages, videos, photos, online communications going back years potentially. The prosecution says the totality of that evidence is what gives them confidence. LAPD Chief Jim McDonnell addressed the public frustration about how long all of this took directly at that press conference. And what he said is worth hearing clearly. And DA Hochman added this when asked why it took as long as it did.
In a situation where you don't have an eyewitness account, or we can't point to a video that shows the killer killing someone, you have to go through the very rigorous and thorough investigation to look at all the digital and forensic evidence. You have to speak with witnesses, often who are cooperative and some who are not cooperative, in order to obtain all the information necessary to decide who did what, when, how, and what their mental state was at the time. That is what we've been doing over the last, between September 8th, roughly, and today when we bring these charges on April 20th. So again, it's a type of case that you want to make sure you get maximum information.
On April 20th, 2026, David Anthony Burke appeared in court for the first time since his arrest. He walked in wearing a black sweatshirt and light gray sweatpants. His attorney entered a not guilty plea on his behalf on all charges. He remains in custody without bail. The prosecution has indicated they may seek the death penalty, though that determination has not yet been made official. California currently has a moratorium on executions, but the charges themselves, first-degree murder with special circumstances, carry a maximum sentence of life without the possibility of parole. Celeste's mother, father, and sister were in that courtroom, watching, waiting. While the legal process is just beginning, the consequences outside that courtroom had already been arriving one by one, long before those charges were ever announced. Interscope Records, the label that signed D4vd and helped build his career, quietly dropped him at some point in 2025. No formal statement, no public announcement, just gone. His song, What Are You Waiting For?, was removed from the Madden NFL 26 soundtrack by EA Sports, also with no statement. English singer Holly Humberstone quietly pulled a collaboration featuring Burke called Super Blood Moon from all streaming platforms. He was removed from the Spilt Milk 2025 festival lineup, and the remaining dates of his Withered World Tour, which had been scheduled to wrap up in Warsaw, Poland in November 2025, were canceled entirely. In the span of weeks, everything he had built was gone. Now here is something worth sitting with for a moment. Prosecutors say the entire alleged motive behind Celeste's death was to protect that career, to keep those streams coming, to keep that tour running, to protect an image he had spent years building, and none of it survived anyway. Not the label, not the tour, not the streams, not the endorsements, not the collaborations. Every single thing he allegedly killed to protect was taken away regardless. And a 14-year-old girl from Lake Elsinore is gone forever. That is the reality of what allegedly happened here. And that reality does not get easier to sit with no matter how many times you read through the details of this case. On October 6, 2025, Celeste's family held a funeral service for her at the Queen of Heaven Cemetery and Mortuary in Rowland Heights, California. They had spent months not knowing, months filing missing persons reports, months hoping she would come home. And when she finally came home, it was not the way any parent ever wants their child to return. Her mother, her father, her sister, they sat in that courtroom on April 20th, 2026, with little visible reaction as those charges were read aloud. Because what do you even feel in that moment? What expression exists for something like that? D.A. Hochman spoke directly about meeting with Celeste's family before that press conference, and what he said captured something real.
I had the chance to meet with some of the family members of Celeste, and their grief is uncalculable as to what happened to their daughter. What they have demanded, what we have assured them that the district attorney's office working with LAPD would give them is the proof beyond a reasonable doubt on who killed their daughter, on how their daughter was killed, when their daughter was killed, and bring that killer to justice. That killer that we have now charged is David Anthony Burke.
Uncalculable. That word says everything. Now, before we close out today, I want to talk about something that goes beyond the courtroom, because this case raises questions that this community needs to sit with honestly. How does a 13-year-old girl end up in a secret connection with a grown man in his 20s, without the adults around her knowing enough to stop it? She was reported missing 3 times. 3 times her family filed reports. 3 times the system logged her as a runaway. And each time, she went back to a situation that allegedly cost her her life. Now, I am not here to place blame on a grieving family. Grief is not the time for blame, but I am here to ask the question that this case demands we ask as a community. Because this is not just about David Burke. It is about a system that too often looks at a young black or brown girl who keeps running away and sees a problem child instead of a child in danger. She was not a problem. She was a child who needed protection, and somewhere along the way, that protection failed her. There is also a question about the adults in Burke's circle. The DA left the door open on potential additional arrests, prosecutors confirmed the investigation is ongoing, and that means there may be people who knew something, people who saw something, people who said nothing. Because justice for Celeste does not end with one arrest. It ends when every single person who had a hand in what happened to her, or who looked the other way while it was happening, is held fully accountable. So what does this case teach us? Because every story on this channel carries a lesson, and this one carries more than one. The first lesson is this: fame is not character. A person can have millions of followers, a platinum record, and a sold-out world tour, and still be capable of the most devastating harm imaginable. We live in a culture that confuses visibility with virtue, that confuses talent with trustworthiness, and that confusion costs lives. The second lesson is one for every parent, every guardian, every adult in a young person's life. The internet has given certain adults direct access to children in ways that previous generations never had to navigate. A Discord server, a Twitch live stream, a DM. That is all it takes to build a connection that a child may not have the emotional tools to recognize as dangerous. Monitoring who your child is talking to online is not an invasion of privacy. It is protection, and protection is the job. Celeste Abigail Rivas Hernandez was 14 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. She should have been worrying about school and friendships and figuring out who she was going to become. Instead, her story ended in the trunk of a car on a Hollywood street, while the person allegedly responsible performed on stage in Minneapolis. She deserved better. Her family deserved better. And this community deserves to keep saying her name until justice is fully served. The legal process is just beginning. There will be preliminary hearings. There will be a trial. There will be evidence presented that the public has not yet seen. David Burke has pleaded not guilty, and his attorneys say they will vigorously defend his innocence.
We believe the actual evidence will show David Burke did not murder Celeste Rivas Hernandez, nor was he the cause of her death. And we would like to be able to have the evidence come into the light of day at the earliest opportunity in order to establish that. We're asking for April 23rd as a 3 of 10.
This case is far from over, and we will be here every step of the way to bring you the facts as they come. If this video added something to your understanding of this case, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you are not already part of this community, now is a good time to be. This is Deadly Affairs. I'll see you in the next one.
I can tell you that the defendant, David Burke, was in court today in shackles and wearing that orange jumpsuit. The biggest new piece of evidence revealed, prosecutors say a significant amount of found on Burke's cell phone. We also want to point out that this all happens one day after the medical examiner's report became public. That is the report on the death of Celeste Rivas Hernandez. The report says, or I should say the family of Rivas Hernandez is absolutely devastated to learn the gruesome details contained in that write-up. That's according to a family statement.
And obviously we don't know if it's Celeste Rivas's images and videos or something else, but that is a significant offense. Obviously, it helps prosecutors prove the sex crimes, the lewd and lascivious, Penal Code Section 288, but it's also a separate crime in and of itself. And it's certainly the possibility that the feds even step into this case because they typically will prosecute these types of cases.
And we also learned from prosecutors that there is a large amount of digital data that needs to be processed and shared as evidence with the defense. So there is a lot that will happen as this case moves forward, but it will be back in court. Both sides will be back in court on April 29th next week so they can get an update on where they stand with evidence, whether they need more time to prepare for a potential capital murder trial. Also worth noting, today's date, April 23rd, marks the 1 year since Celeste Rivas Hernandez was last seen alive.